I'm joined by Philip Norton, Lord Norton of Louth. He joins me now. He's an author, an academic and a Conservative peer. And Michael Fabricant is a former Conservative MP for Lichfield. Welcome both of you. Thanks very much for being with me. Philip, take us back to the very first Conservative Party conference. What do we know about it?
Well, insofar as the history, if you look back last century, since the party was founded, it's come together for a conference. And the big change is the one you've touched upon, if you like, between the last century and this. So for much of the 20th century, the format was pretty much the same. And I would say there were three key features which are now completely gone. Because originally it was a members' gathering. So virtually the whole programme was debating motions that were put in by the local parties.
Right.
You look at the programmes of the area, you'd have several hundred, some years over 1,000 motions from local parties. The motions were selected, and that was the focus. And that brings on to the second feature. It was very much focused on the conference hall, that sense of unity, members coming together, listening to whoever's at rostrum, followed by the big speaker, member of the cabinet or shadow cabinet, responding to the debate. Some of the motions were balloted, so that occasionally embarrassed the party because it was, let's have a motion on capital punishment. So who was the big hitter you had to put on to calm the party type thing. But it's very much focused on members in the hall. There's that sense of coming together. So there were fringe events, but it was a fringe.
Yeah, sure.
And the other feature was the presence of the big beasts, the big names. They're on the platform. Then the leader turned up, and under Heath, he was there for a good part of the conference, and that carried on. Because before that, the leader turned up on the last day, gave the great speech. They were all there.
Because it wasn't about them.
No, exactly.
Yeah,
Whereas now, it's not member focused because it's all media oriented. This conference is unusual because there are some member debates, but it's not focused on the main hall. If you like, the fringe is the main event. It's just, you look at the programme, it's all fringe events.
Even in the 20 years I've been coming to conferences, I've seen. They used to be much more dominated by people from constituency associations.
Oh yes.
Much less so now. Well, which was the first conference you came to, Philip?
I think I came first in 1966.
Right.
That's what I was looking through my programmes, and that's the earliest I've got.
Was the merch any good that year?
The what?
The merchandise.
Oh, I see. That's a good question. I'm trying to remember the. What was on?
Whether
offer?
there were badges. Michael Fabricant,
yes.
when was your first conference?
Well, I was trying to think about that, but I think it might have been in the 1970s, so I'm a real saddo. But, talking about the fringe, nowadays the Edinburgh fringe is bigger than the main event. Yeah. And in some ways, I think that's what's happened in modern Conservative Party conferences.
Have they, for you, Michael, got more or less fun?
Oh, they are now much more fun. They were frightfully grand. I remember, going to the Brighton conference early on before the bombing and meeting a very upset John Knott, actually, who had just stormed out of an interview with Robin Day. And he was asking me, are you enjoying the conference? And I said, well, I'm a bit bored with it, really. He's a bit bored. And I went, well, yes, I'm in the hall listening to all the speeches. And he said, Michael, you were educated in California, weren't you? And I went, well, partly, yes. And he said, well, treat it like a convention. And it's true now. I hardly ever since have gone into the hall.
That's interesting, yeah. And you wander around and enjoy yourself.
I wander around, meet lots of people, enjoy myself. And really, that's what it's all about. It's meeting and greeting people.
Well, it is, but it loses a sense of unity. Well, it's a discrete, all these units are discrete entities rather than coming together in the feeling of this is the party united, here's the great speech from the leader. So you notice those extracts you showed played at the beginning, some of those were the great conference orations, and the others were just
a thing that happened.
You still get though, we're not getting it at this conference for obvious reasons.
The fact we're not getting this conference,
But normally you do get the big conference speech, and people are queuing up round the corners.
I've always been a fan of walking around everywhere else while the big speech is going on to see the various places people are watching on TV.
Well, I'm always on the train of shame because I'm heading back home, but don't tell anyone. Oops,
I'm afraid we just told everyone. Philip, what do we know about the very first Conservative Party conference?
Not a lot, I think, in terms of the history, because you had newspaper reportings. And don't forget, of course, it's only in the 20th century you started getting broadcasting. So it's mainly just what we know from the archival stuff. So I haven't got that much on the really early ones when the party came into being, because the Conservative Party has been in existence in the 1830s and really became an organised party consequent to the 1867 Reform Act. 'Cause that's when the parties we now know them, they moved from being cadre parties to mass membership parties. So it's very much member focused, and I mean the members were very much champions for the party, and it comes back to your point about, I think, about merchandise, but it was campaigning. So when Quinton Hogg was using the conference as a platform for standing, and they're giving out buttons with Q on for Quinton, that type of thing, that was how the conference was used. But it was very much
that's more or less what's happening in this conference, because you've got incredible campaigning going on between the four contenders. I see people walking around. There's someone there with a Tom Tugendhat hat badge. I saw someone with all four badges.
Well, that is
all four badges is just greedy. Sorry, Philip.
But I was going to say, yes, that's absolutely right, because you think back to 1963, that was when they're all making their pitch for the leadership. So the conference really mattered, because of course that killed off some leaderships.
Right.
Reginald Maudling didn't shine, Rab Butler didn't shine. Yes, that was really sort of the parade of the candidates that you had. So it really mattered. So you are getting a bit of that coming back now, but it's the candidates, they're in the hall, but they're also around doing their own thing, rather than being there on the rostrum all lined up and everybody gathered to hear the great speech in the hall.
Michael, what's your most memorable conference, and what made it the most memorable conference?
Well, the saddest one was the Brighton bombing, and I was in the bar at the time at 3 a.m. My parents were not very pleased, because, they thought, what am I doing out at 3 a.m? And I never forget the sort of thump. It wasn't really an explosion, it was a thump. And all the dust coming in, and it was only when I went outside that I suddenly realised, I hadn't realised what had actually happened.
Yeah, I remember my mother trying to get hold of which hotel my father had been in that as well. Terrible day. Philip, what would you say has been the most significant Conservative Party conference? I mean, that horrific example aside, obviously.
Yes, because it depends. I'm sorry to be an academic. It depends on your criteria for determining significance.
I'm interested in your criteria for determining significance.
Well, I'd say there were two things. One is, if you like, the great speech that's gone down in history. So you had the great orations from the platform, the Churchills, things like that, because he was a great orator. It wasn't a great debater, but a great orator. So, Churchill, Thatcher, in terms of the memorable speeches, the ladies not for turning type of thing. But the other one is, of course, then the separate criteria is what we've been discussing as a platform for who's going to be the leader.
Yeah, sure.
So I think those are the key features.
And that's why, in many ways, I think this conference is it's certainly the most wet conference when I'm talking about the weather outside, but it's certainly, I think, one of the most exciting conferences, because you've got the candidates not only being on stage, not only doing their thing on their own little platforms, because each one, by the way, has been given a booth, and I'm not quite sure whether that was a sort of fundraising thing for the Conservative Party, or whether there wasn't enough sponsors, so there was room for booths. And they're meeting and greeting and saying hello to everyone, and you could argue that's getting back to the old 19th century grassroots campaigning.
It's key, yes, absolutely right, because that's what the party should be doing, because I was a convener of a group the Association of Conservative Peers set up after the election, Project Phoenix, to see how could the party be revitalised as a party from an organisational point of view. One of the things we're focusing on was the conference, and if you like, giving it back to the members, giving it a platform, so it actually mattered. So that's why this conference matters, because members feel there's something in it for them. Why are they involved? Well, I'm going to have a vote for these people. Whereas previous conferences,
and it's democracy, which actually demonstrates why it's complete madness when some people talk about actually it should be the MPs only who make the choice, when actually it's the ordinary members who get on with the work and do the leafleting.
I've occasionally wondered if all parties should be forced to have their conference at the same time in the same building. That would be quite the bonfire. I wonder if one reason why this conference, because this conference has been surprising in mood, because it's been much less bitter and downtrodden, frankly, than I expected it to be. I wonder, Philip, one reason for that might be that there's no crisis. Because often at a conference there is something going on and somebody's in crisis, a Prime Minister is hanging on, or somebody is being pushed to resign, and that of course, is absent this time.
Absolutely. I mean, it is a key point. The party's in opposition. The party, the parliamentary party, is down to a third of what it was. So now it's not so much reactive to a current crisis. It really should be forward-looking, which is the base on which you ought to be choosing a leader.
I think there's another reason as well, though. Yeah. I think if the conference had been held about 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, people would be gloomy and hopeless. and in the literal sense hopeless. But I think the delegates here do have hope. Hope for what? Having seen, in my opinion, probably the most shambling government in 3 months. It was less than 3 months since the July 4th general election. I think people, rightly or wrongly, think, you know what? We're not only going to be picking a leader in 4 years' time, I think many people think we could be picking a future Prime Minister. We can make it back in 4 years.
We'll come to that precise point in a moment. I think I've got 2 more questions for both of you. First, I wanted to ask both of you what you think is the most impressive speech you've ever seen given at a party conference. I don't mean the one you liked the most, the most impressive kind of oratory performance. I'll give you a moment to think about. Who wants to go first? Michael,
Well, it was a Margaret Thatcher speech I saw, and there was a sort of grandeur in many ways, and you heard it, of course, with your clip before our interview, with the way Ted Heath presented himself. You know, can you imagine someone doing it that way nowadays? But Margaret Thatcher, who knifed, if you like, Ted Heath. But she had her own grandeur too, and I never saw Ted Heath speak, but I saw, you know, they were great people. It's rather like Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922
standing right
committee.
Over there, and I should be speaking to
standing there, doing it to embarrass him. But, you know,
Philip.
these great people who actually are on a pedestal, if you like, whereas nowadays I think that doesn't happen quite
I mean,
so
obviously
much.
we're influenced by the fact we've got people like you, broadcasters, so now you get the more recent speeches.
We set a very high bar.
Well, and you provide that platform for us seeing what's going on, because, of course, the earlier ones, it's just clips. And there are 2 ways to look at it. One is if you like, the positive impact, where it really, the Thatcher speech, memorable. Others, if you like, memorable for the wrong reasons, and possibly the Ian Duncan Smith, the quiet man type of speech.
I'm afraid we've got to leave it there. I wish we had so much longer. Thank you very much indeed, Michael Fabricant. Thank you very much indeed, Philip Norton, Lord Norton. Great pleasure to speak to both of you.